How does one judge a society? By how it looks after its children? What about its elderly? How it cares for the poor? Do the citizens treat one another with dignity, equality, and respect? In other words, what makes a society good? Well, for that matter, what makes a society great? Our answers to these questions no doubt vary from person to person. But one thing is certain. In the 1960s, President Lyndon Baines Johnson attempted to answer them with a bold agenda that he called the Great Society. Did LBJ succeed in this? And what was the impact of the Great Society on American life? That's what we're going to take a look at today. First, a bit of background. Lyndon Baines Johnson ascended to the presidency in November of 1963 following the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. The contrast between Johnson and his slain predecessor couldn't have been more stark. Kennedy was a New Englander, born in a wealthy family and Harvard educated. Johnson was a Southerner, born into a family of modest means in rural Texas. This gave him insight into the cultural reality of the Jim Crow South that Kennedy lacked. This, combined with his years of experience in the United States Senate, likely helped him achieve one of Kennedy's unrealized goals, the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. It ended segregation in public places and banned employment discrimination on the basis of these factors. The act also created the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to investigate claims of workplace discrimination. That same year, President Johnson made his intentions known that he would run for president in his own right. In May of 1964, in a speech in Athens, Ohio, the president proclaimed, quote, "We will build a great society. It is a society where no child will go unfed and no youngster will go unschooled." Weeks later, during a speech in the University of Michigan, Johnson again invoked the phrase "great society" to describe his bold set of domestic policies he hoped to enact if elected. These policies would be the focus of the challenges of poverty, inequality, and the access to education and healthcare, among other issues of the day. Johnson's opponent in 1964 was Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater. Goldwater was an unabashed conservative. His nomination was a repudiation of the more moderate version of the Republican Party that had been present throughout the Eisenhower era of the 1950s. He railed against all forms of what he saw as federal government overreach, high taxes, New Deal programs, civil rights, and of course, Johnson's Great Society. Goldwater laid the groundwork for the conservative revolution that was yet to come, but in 1964, it wasn't a winning message. In the end, Johnson won in a historic landslide, winning 44 out of 50 states and over 60% of the popular vote. This massive victory was seen as a mandate to begin enacting the kind of groundbreaking Great Society legislation that would help Johnson achieve his lofty goals. In early 1965, the Democratic-controlled Congress got to work enacting the laws that would make up Johnson's Great Society agenda. To address access to health care, Congress passed Medicare and Medicaid. These programs provided government-funded health care for elderly and low-income Americans. After passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the next step in the civil rights movement was addressing access to the ballot box. Following the violence against peaceful protesters on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, Johnson won passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which removed many barriers to voting and empowered the federal government to protect access to the ballot box. Johnson then set out to wage a war on poverty. This included the creation of the Office of Economic Opportunity, which funded various anti-poverty initiatives, such as Head Start, which provided early childhood education and other support to low-income families. Between 1965 and 1968, federal spending to assist the poor doubled. Dozens of programs were created, and the percentage of Americans living in poverty dropped from 20% down to 12%. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act provided federal funding to public schools with the aim of reducing the educational disparities between wealthy and poor areas. Upward Bound was a program designed to help disadvantaged students get into college. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 abolished the national origins quota system, which had been in place since the 1920s, and it ended the exclusion of Asian immigrants who had been largely banned from entering the United States since the late 1800s. Furthermore, it made family reunification a focus of American immigration policy. On the cultural front, the National Endowment for the Arts and Humanities was created to financially assist musicians, actors, painters, and other artists. Furthermore, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was established to fund educational TV and radio broadcasting. Because can a society really be judged great if it doesn't have Sesame Street? The Great Society also changed the makeup of the president's cabinet, as two new cabinet-level departments were established. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, was established to oversee federal housing programs, and the Department of Transportation was created and tasked with developing and coordinating transportation policies at a federal level, and promoting transportation safety and efficiency across the different modes of transportation, including aviation, highways, railroads, and waterways. There is no doubt that the Great Society had a major implication on American life. Some programs, such as Medicare and Medicaid, are still in place today, while others have been scaled back. The reasons for this vary, but they include the fact that such federal programs are very, very expensive. And throughout the 1960s, President Johnson oversaw the drastic increase in American involvement in Vietnam, diverting countless taxpayer dollars away from domestic programs and toward military involvement in Southeast Asia. Secondly, President Johnson did not seek a second full term as president, allowing future presidents to alter many of his initiatives. And finally, many of the politicians who came to Washington in the years following LBJ were conservative Republicans critical of large government programs. This conservative backlash against the government spending on social programs and the expanding role of the federal government would lead to the conservative resurgence of the 1970s and 80s. Despite a conservative backlash and a lot of changes over time, LBJ's Great Society marked a high watermark for American liberalism in the 20th century. Its focus on the government's role in protecting civil rights, access to health care and education, and fighting poverty is still a legacy that Americans live with and debate to this day. Thanks for watching.